This is the fourth lesson in our series of lessons over essay writing, and today I'm going to be talking about your introduction. Let me be very clear. Before you get to this point, you need to make sure that you have completed the previous lessons. Number 1, the evidence-based thesis, and number 2, the pre-write. Both of those must be done. If they are not done at this point, you need to go back, finish those, and then come back to this one when you are finished. So let's go ahead and proceed, talk about the introduction paragraph. It's possible that you've heard this acronym before. HIT stands for Hook, Information, and Thesis. If you haven't heard this before, whatever it is that you've learned about an introduction paragraph before, this is not going to contradict that. It should only complement it. So let's just jump right in. Your hook. Your hook needs to grab the reader's attention. Some of you know it as an attention grabber or a lead-in or something like that. I want you all to be creative with it. It's going to vary from paper to paper, depending on your style, also depending on your topic. But the reason I ask you to be creative with it is because it sets a tone for the rest of your essay. The better your hook is, the more interested your reader is going to be, and the more bought in the reader is going to be to your argument. And because you're arguing and you're persuading, you have to make sure that you persuade the reader and draw the reader in. So here's a couple of examples of what you can do. First of all, a personal anecdote. It doesn't actually have to be personal. It could just be an anecdote that you heard. Just to be clear, an anecdote is a story, a short story that's related to the topic. Definitely, if you choose this option, do not go overboard. This needs to be a couple of sentences at the most. A quote from literature. Let me be clear, it needs to be explained, not just plopped onto the paper, but it needs to be integrated into your writing. And that's what I mean when I say explained. Also, it needs to be attributed to the source. You have to make sure that you mention who or where it comes from. Okay? Next, describing a relevant or a historical event. Okay, and so you're going to see in the example I'm going to show you, I kind of combine the quote and the historical event in the example. You can give an analogy, and so by this I mean making the comparison between one thing and another. You can also list a shocking statistic if you can find one on the topic. So just to remind you all, pardon me. Just to remind you all got this resource. It should be on the back of your resource packet. If you don't have the hard copy, remember that it's in Schoology. The name of the resource is American Dream Essay Resources. So, this actually is a really great resource because it gives examples of all the things that I've suggested for you to do for your hooks. So definitely take a look at this. It's really helpful. Now, a couple of things that I'm asking you not to do. Please do not open with a question. Very, very rarely does it actually work to open with a question. And so I'm asking you all to avoid doing that altogether because it becomes a little bit too elementary schoolish, and you guys have higher thoughts. You have really good ideas. So I want you to put thought into it and not do this option. Secondly, often students are following this pattern by creating a sentence that says, some people believe, others believe that, I believe, blah, blah, blah. If you're writing a rough draft and you just want to get started, this is not necessarily a bad way to start, but I'm asking you not to do that for your hook because it is just too formulaic. So we've talked about hook. Let's move on to the I for information. So this must give necessary background information about your topic or the text you will be discussing. So let's just be clear. You all are going to be talking about many texts. So the second question that asks you what is your text or novel about, that's not relevant here. The question you want to be focusing on in this essay is what is the overall topic you will be discussing. And of course, for all of you, it is the American dream. All right. And of course, you're going to be talking about the controversy around the American dream. Why is it that some people don't believe in it? Why is it that some people do believe in it? And so that's what you got to focus on in your information part of your HIT introduction paragraph. Lastly, your thesis statement. So your thesis, we're going to go through a checklist with that a little bit later. Right now, you have a draft of it because you did the evidence-based thesis and you also did your pre-write. And so you should already have this. There should be not any need to discuss that any further, but of course, if you have questions, you guys know how to get a hold of me. So let's move on. And what I'm going to do is show you, evidence-based thesis. Remember this. I'm going to show you an example introduction. Now, let me set the stage here very quickly. This paragraph is actually a paragraph that is meant to interpret a poem. It's completely meant to just interpret one poem. And so when I tell you guys about the information here, for this paragraph, it's going to be addressing this question in the information. Again, you all are going to be addressing this question. But right now in the example, it's going to be addressing this question. What is your text, novel, short story, or poem about? So let's start from the beginning. In the hook. In 1987, in West Berlin, Germany, Ronald Reagan famously declared, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." While Reagan's time in office is now mixed with controversy, very few people could disagree with his words on that day. His message was clear. Those suffering in East Berlin should be allowed to cross over into a better place, but the wall was standing between those people and their freedom. So what I did here, as I told you before, is I took a quote from this historical event and I described the historical event itself. And so I kind of combined those, and they have a relevance to the poem that I'm going to interpret in this example essay. Moving on to the information. Again, for yours, you will be talking about the American dream and the controversy around the American dream. Right here, I'm going to be talking about what the poem is about. The poem is Robert Frost's Mending Wall. In Robert Frost's poem, Mending Wall, Frost poses a similar dilemma. He questions whether a wall is necessary at all between his own and his neighbor's property. While Frost never answers the question outright, he does suggest that the wall is not necessary and that it only serves to divide himself and his neighbor, which keeps them from having a real relationship in which they can learn from each other. So as you see here, I spent 2 sentences giving information about the poem. Now I'm going to move on to the actual thesis. Your thesis is going to look very different than mine, but overall, remember, the job of the thesis is to outline what you're going to argue, okay? So in Mending Wall, the poem, Frost emphasizes the theme of ignorance through the literary devices of symbol, metaphor, and form to ultimately show that the wall is not just a physical, but a mental boundary between the 2 neighbors. Now, again, in your essay, your thesis is going to say something like, the American dream is achievable because X, Y, and Z, right? Or the American dream is not achievable for all people because of X, Y, and Z. Okay, so now that you have this information about the HIT format, the introduction, I want you to go to resource number 5 in your packets, and I want you to complete this little piece of that outline, okay? And so take a few minutes to do that, and then we're going to be moving on to a TIAC review.